Bombing intensifies as the US conducts even more strikes in Yemen. The past 24 hours have seen the US unleash a new volley of aerial assaults against the Houthis, causing more devastation among the militant group's ranks. The message from the US is clear: the Houthis need to clear out of the Red Sea or the bombs will keep dropping. US President Donald Trump's method of tackling the Houthis is a departure from the strategies employed by former US President Joe Biden. Yet the question remains, will these constant strikes be enough to put the Houthis out of commission for good? March 28 brought reports of renewed US strikes in Yemen, signaling an escalation in a quickly intensifying conflict. Arab News was among the first to report on the fresh waves of strikes, which targeted multiple Yemeni regions from Thursday evening through to early Friday. Numerous neighborhoods were pummeled with bombs, including several Houthi-controlled regions in the Yemeni capital of Sanaa. Initial reports about the damage caused and the initial loss of life vary, though Arab News notes that the number of strikes appeared particularly intense compared to other days in the campaign that began March 15. It seems like the US is cranking up the pressure as its strikes hit harder than previous ones and caused more damage. According to the Houthis' initial reports, the March 28 round of attacks injured at least 7 people in Sanaa. The US also ordered more strikes targeting several Houthi strongholds. These include Saada, which was among the first cities the Houthis captured when it began waging war against Yemen's government. The Red Sea port city of Hodeida was also targeted. That strike seems to be an attempt by the US both to limit the Houthis' ability to send its pirating ships into the Red Sea and to disrupt the flow of weapons to the group from Iran. Also targeted were the Marib, Amran and Al-Jawf governorates in Yemen. Neither the Houthis nor US Central Command are talking much about the most recent strikes, leaving us to piece together what happened from limited information. According to the militant group, Sanaa International Airport was among the American targets, as it has been since the US started its bombing campaign. It's believed the US also conducted up to 19 strikes in Amran, where the Houthis have several military camps and installations. Those strikes also seem to knock out the communications network used by the Houthis' Al-Masirah satellite news station, meaning the US is targeting the Houthis' propagandists as much as it's targeting the group's militant arm. Another report about Friday's strikes come from Xinhua Net, a Chinese-operated media outlet. It reiterates the region's Arab News claims the US targeted, adding that more than 40 strikes were launched against Sanaa alone before dawn of March 28. It also points out that the strikes came in the wake of the Houthis claiming responsibility for launching a pair of ballistic missiles at Israel's Ben Gurion airport and a military installation in Tel Aviv on March 27. The strikes in Sanaa caused damage to several buildings, homes and shops in Sanaa, along with a Houthi command camp in central Sanaa, according to the outlet. If nothing else, this latest round of strikes sends a clear message from the US. If the Houthis retaliate with their own attacks, the US will just keep hitting them harder. President Trump seemed to say as much on March 26, according to Anti-War. After calling the bombing campaign very successful, he claimed that the Houthis are practically begging for peace at this point. They want us to stop so badly, he told reporters in the Oval Office.
And they've got to stop. They've got to say no mas. But I can only say that the attacks, it's attacks every day, every night. It's not just the one, you're talking about one. The attacks have been very successful, even beyond our wildest expectations. We've hit them very hard, very successfully, and we're going to do it for a long time. We're going to keep it going for a long time.
The Houthis have responded by claiming that they will not start begging Trump for peace. In a statement released by the militant group's spokesman, Yahya Sari, they say, the Yemeni armed forces affirmed that the American aggression will only increase the Yemeni steadfastness and resilience, and the confrontations over the last few days were only the beginning of what will be a gradual expansion of defensive operations in the coming days. These are worrying statements for the Middle East coming from both sides. The US and the Houthis are escalating their attacks, and while the US has the clear advantage thanks to its aerial might, the Middle East and Israel can't ignore the fact that the Houthis don't appear to be backing down. It seems like the situation is only going to get far worse before it has any chance of getting better. Trump's bombing campaign against the Houthis began on March 15, mere hours after members of his administration had accidentally leaked plans for the campaign to the Atlantic via the messaging app Signal. That leak is already being investigated in the US, with The Guardian reporting that several US senators are now calling for a Pentagon investigation into the leak. A bipartisan group of senators released a letter on March 27, noting that the leaked chat was alleged to have included classified information pertaining to sensitive military actions in Yemen. If true, this reporting raises questions as to the use of unclassified networks to discuss sensitive and classified information, as well as the sharing of such information with those who do not have proper clearance and need to know. Still, as the US is rocked by this military scandal, the bombing campaign its launch shows no signs of stopping. The initial March 15 attacks were already among some of the most intense the US has launched against the Houthis. By March 17, the militant group was claiming that the US strikes had killed 53 people, including 5 children. As is typical for the Houthis, they made no mention of whether any of their members or leaders were among the dead. The Times of Israel reports that almost all of the US strikes are coming from the USS Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier, along with its associated warships. The latter are firing cruise missile at Houthi targets, the outlet claims, while the USS Harry S. Truman is serving as the jump-off point for fighter jets that are traveling into Yemeni territory to drop bombs. The same outlet also reports that the number of dead now sits at 57 as of March 27. That's already more than half of the people who died due to US airstrikes in Yemen throughout the whole of 2024, again demonstrating that Trump's campaign is more intense than anything the Houthis have previously faced. The Houthis have even released details, though these are questionable at best given the source. It claims that the US, working alongside the UK, launched 930 strikes against Yemen in 2024. That's already disputed by the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, or ACLED. The US-based group claims that the two countries unleashed 305 strikes during the year, about a third of what the Houthis claim. The discrepancy may come from the Houthis counting every piece of ordnance released as a separate strike, while the ACLED counts individual events involving multiple ordnances. But the reality is that it doesn't really matter. Trump's March strikes are quickly starting to catch up. According to ACLED, the attacks between March 15 and March 21 amounted to 56 strikes. We can safely assume the Houthis believe this number to be closer to 150 based on its previous claims. There have also been 7 more days since ACLED reported these figures, with US aerial assaults not only continuing but growing in intensity. It's not outside of the realms of possibility to suggest that the US has launched more than 100 individual strikes against the Houthis in just 2 weeks in March. If it continues this level of aerial pummeling, it'll crack the 305 strikes ACLED says the US launched in 2024 by the end of 2025. And if anything, the strikes are only going to become more intense from here. The US is sending the USS Carl Vinson into the Red Sea. That's another Nimitz-class aircraft carrier like the USS Harry S. Truman, and it will double the US aerial presence in and around Yemen. Nimitz-class carriers are believed to be capable of carrying a maximum of 130 Fa-18 Hornets. However, the US often mixes and matches the aircraft stowed on its carriers, bringing the number down to anywhere between 64 and 90 aircraft. Regardless, that's a lot of aerial force to send against a militant group that can only respond with missiles and drones shipped from Iran. It's also notable that no US strikes appear to have come from any of the bases that it maintains near Yemen. The Chicago Council on Global Affairs says that Saudi Arabia, Kuwait and Qatar are home to at least 10 American military bases. The US also maintains the Al-Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which is around 700 miles away from Yemen. That base is home to 10,000 American military personnel and hosts the US Air Force's Middle East Central Command. It's likely that the US hasn't used these bases because of the turmoil ongoing in the Middle East. For instance, when Israel replied to the October 2023 Hamas terrorist attacks with a full-blown war against the group, Qatar released a statement claiming Israel was solely responsible for the ongoing escalation due to its continuous violation of the rights of the Palestinian people. So, the US isn't using those bases for its Yemen strikes right now to avoid causing more conflict in the Middle East. However, that doesn't mean these bases won't come into play in the future. The US is also transferring B-2 Spirit stealth bombers to the remote island of Diego Garcia. Nestled deep in the Indian Ocean, that island could represent a jumping-off point for a future war against Iran, which is in the US crosshairs because of its close ties to the Houthis. At least 3 B-2s are already stationed on the island, with reports suggesting that up to 5 more are on their way. And the US has a history of deploying these formidable bombers when the stakes are high. In October 2024, Biden unleashed B-2s and their bunker-busting bombs against the Houthis to take out members of the group that were hiding underground. So why does all of this matter? It shows us that Trump is very serious when he says that the intense US strikes against the Houthis can carry on for a long time. And not only is he serious, but he's preparing for that possibility. Another aircraft carrier, along with its fleet of accompanying destroyers, is heading to the Red Sea. The US is preparing for more bombing campaigns via Diego Garcia, and it always has the option of launching even more attacks by its other Middle Eastern bases. These are all clear warnings being sent to the Yemeni militant group. But they also bring us to a question. Will the US's escalation of its Houthi bombing campaigns eradicate the group as Trump is claiming? We can say for certain that Trump's campaign represents a clear departure from the approach the US took under Biden and alongside the UK in 2024. US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz made that clear during an interview with ABC's This Week on March 16.
The difference is these were not kind of pinprick back and forth, what ultimately proved to be feckless attacks. This was an overwhelming response that actually targeted multiple Houthi leaders and took them out. And the difference here is, one, going after the Houthi leadership, and two, holding Iran responsible. It is Iran that has repeatedly funded, resourced, trained, and helped the Houthis target not only U.S. warships, but global commerce, and has helped the Houthis shut down 2 of the world's most strategic sea lanes.
It's certainly true that the Trump administration's approach to striking the Houthis is very different to Biden's. Beyond the increased number of daily strikes, ACLED senior analyst Luca Nova notes that the Biden administration typically focused on mobile launchers to target missiles and drones, followed by assaults on Houthi infrastructure. Trump's attacks, on the other hand, seem to be targeting more Yemeni urban areas. That doesn't mean that the US isn't hitting Houthi military bases. It is. However, it's not targeting bases and installations the Houthis may have felt were safe when the US was operating under Joe Biden. As Nova says, it's very likely that somehow the Trump administration is pursuing a decapitation strategy. In other words, the US under Trump is trying to decimate the Houthi leadership with an overwhelming display of aerial force that will leave the group rudderless. There are also differences in the level and type of communication surrounding the strikes. The Italian Institute for International Political Studies, or ISPI, highlights this, claiming that the US now seems to be taking a more confrontational approach to the Houthis and their main benefactor, Iran. Under Trump, the US is following the decapitation model Israel is using against Hamas in Gaza. It's now the policy of the United States to cooperate with its regional partners to eliminate the Houthis' capabilities and operations, quotes the ISPI from a White House press release. It also notes that there is no use of the word proportionate in that statement. Under Biden, the US always promised proportionate responses to Houthi aggression. Trump's administration is taking a different approach. It's aiming to overwhelm rather than respond in kind. Furthermore, Trump has made multiple references to holding Iran accountable for funding and supporting the Houthis, suggesting that the US messaging surrounding its most recent intense strikes is supposed to go far beyond Yemen. On the transparency front, there are also key changes, as the Times of Israel highlights. The Trump administration is also allowing the US military's Central Command, or CENTCOM, which oversees Mideast operations, to launch offensive strikes at will, rather than having the White House sign off on each attack as under Biden. That will lead to more strikes, according to the outlet. It also means far less direct presidential involvement in the strikes, resulting in less information being shared to the public via the president. Under Biden, CENTCOM also released details to the American people about every strike Biden authorized. Those details may have come after the strikes themselves, though they still provided details about what the US targeted and why. This latest campaign has done away with those specific details. However, former US Navy Vice Admiral Kevin Donegan tells the Times of Israel that this is all part of the plan. You don't tell the enemy what you're doing, and you don't tell them what you're not going to do. The counter-argument is that a lack of US transparency about the strikes means that reports from the Houthis are all anybody has to go on when it comes to what the US is achieving. And that brings us to an enormous issue the US will have to face as its strikes intensify: civilian casualties. Every report issued by the Houthis, including those detailing the March 27 and March 28 strikes, makes no mention of what, if any, infrastructure the US is destroying. They also don't mention the Houthi death count or whether the US has successfully taken out any of its leaders. What they do is emphasize that America's intense strikes are causing collateral damage in Yemen's residential centers. The Houthi press releases detailing the 57 dead, 5 of whom are children, are an example of this. The Houthis use these press releases to both shield the world's eyes from the real damage the US is doing to the group and present the US as an aggressor that's targeting innocent civilians. It's a propaganda play, but it's also not without its justifications. The Houthis have claimed that America's strikes have hit a cancer clinic that was under construction in Sanaa. They claimed civilian deaths and released photographs of what appeared to be residential and commercial buildings reduced to rubble. As Emily Tripp of the UK-based Air Wars puts it, just because you can't see civilian harm doesn't mean it's not happening. It's an extremely complicated information environment in Yemen. The Houthis have extensive restrictions on activists and operations, media and press. The point is that the Houthis are controlling the narrative surrounding the US airstrikes, at least in the Middle East. All the US military has said in response so far is that the Houthis continue to communicate lies and disinformation. Beyond that, we have Mike Waltz's claim that the strikes have managed to take out the Houthis' head missileer and not a whole lot else to go on. In the context of Trump's claims that the US is prepared to keep its bombing runs going for a long time, this lack of attention to the information side of the war could be critical. The US may have to find a balance. It's clear that it doesn't want to be as transparent about the strikes as it was under Joe Biden. However, if it's to keep public sentiment on its side, both domestically and especially in the Middle East, it'll need to reveal something about what these strikes are achieving. Otherwise, most of the information the rest of the world gets will come from the Houthis. So, will dropping bombs be enough? Possibly not. At least that's according to a New York Times report, which says that many Middle East experts believe that the Houthis won't be easily beaten by the US aerial bombardment as some may believe. Few wars have been won with air power alone, and some military experts say it will be no different with the Houthis. If the US is to achieve its goal of eradicating the group, a ground operation may be needed following this initial round of airstrikes. At worst, the US may have to conduct a full occupation of Yemen, given how far the Houthis' tendrils extend through that country. One of those experts is Gregory D. Johnson of the Arab Gulf States Institute. He says, "The United States can hurt the Houthis, it can weaken them, but without effective ground troops, either its own or someone else's, it will not be able to eliminate their capabilities." After all, the Houthis have managed to essentially take control of most of Yemen, with the country's exiled government seemingly having no plan for getting rid of them. Right now, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, who jointly began their own campaigns a decade ago to eradicate the Houthis, are deadlocked with them. Both are now pushing for peace talks. The Trump administration may believe its airstrikes will be enough to get rid of the Houthis, but the reality may be that the US will have to escalate further with land forces because it's underestimating how resilient the militant group is. Will the US campaign continue to escalate to that point? Let us know what you think in the comments, along with sharing your opinions about the latest US airstrikes in Yemen. Is Trump achieving his goals? How much more intense will the strikes get? Share your thoughts with us, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for up-to-date information about what's happening in Yemen right now. We're an independent and unbiased source for news and commentary on the latest developments in this emerging Middle East crisis, plus ongoing developments in Ukraine and elsewhere around the world, and we truly couldn't do it without your support. So thank you for watching.